и сме тук на една дискусия, която се забави и много трудно се организира, защото госпожа Барбара Штайнер дойде просто преди 10 минути от самолета и нямаше никаква друга възможност да дойде в София да обсъди проблемите на публичното пространство, на градското публично пространство, предимно в връзката с завършеното на проекта на Пламен Деянов в Бронзовата къща. Поканих за модератор колегата Luchezar Boyadjiev, който не е просто художник, но се занимава с проблемите на публичното пространство и с проблемите на публичността изцяло в обществото от доста години. Знае нашите възпаления и драми, знае и някакви норми, в това число даже и тези норми, които вече горе-долу са очевидни и в публичното пространство в България и в София. И това, което вероятно сте прочели за двете ни гостинки, го знаете, но Luchezar ще каже също така няколко думи. Аз смятам, че темата е изключително важна. Ние тук за няколко минути успяхме да си разменим нашите общи преживявания и притеснения по повод на интерпретациите на публичността, които съществуват в съвременното общество не само при нас, а навсякъде. И отново се връщаме към въпроса, който някога задавахме в визуалния семинар преди почти 15 години, но кого всъщност принадлежи публичното пространство? И това е практически един от сегментите на темата днес. Благодаря ви, колегата Boyadjiev. Заповядайте.
Аз ще започна направо на английски. Good evening. And if you would allow me, first of all, welcome to Sofia, Barbara, Vanessa. For those of you who might not be aware, Barbara Steiner has had a colleague, a co-curator in Leipzig for nearly 10 years, who's a Bulgarian, our younger colleague, Ilina Koralova. So she's more or less aware of Bulgaria. And Vanessa, on the other hand, has been here several times, but for both of them I have prepared some questions at the end. But prepare to explain to us, Vanessa, what does it mean to be head of dramaturgy for the Kunsthalle at the end, not now. For our two guests, a short introduction that has to do with Sofia as it is now. Sofia as a city is in the middle of preparing of its long-term vision for Sofia, which is involving a lot of a long process. I believe it started a year and a half ago at least. I'm not sure when it will be ready, but it's supposed to be a long-term vision for the future of Sofia, not as urban planning, but as a capital of culture, so to say, many other things, as a city that would be more convenient to live in. Because of this in-between transition, but more consciously prepared vision, we hope that no matter what this composition of the municipal council is politically, no matter who the mayor is, this vision will be sustainable over at least 20 and hopefully more years. Now, secondly, why I'm saying this, because in 2013, a group called Situations in Bristol in UK prepared 12 new rules for public art. Rule number 2 says it's not forever, public art. And then it says places don't remain still and unchanged. So why should public art remain unchanged and still and permanent? Now, in this way, neither Austria nor Bulgaria had a choice of when to be the chairman, the president of the European Union. On the other hand, there was this old project that Plamen Dejanoff had been working for. So I believe that a year and a half ago, in the middle of this process of reinterpretation, redefinition, searching for a vision for the future of Sofia, there was at first a happy coincidence of factors and energies, and so the debate started. Now, from that point in the spring of 2017 until now, many things have happened. One of them was the debate that finally culminated. One of them was an event that culminated with the demolition of a very, very much contested monument dedicated to 13th century of the establishment of Bulgarian state, a monument that was erected in 1981 and was, I mean, it was maybe too modernist, it was maybe too ideological, there are many, many different versions, but the point is that it was destroyed, demolished and taken away, and to be replaced in the future with something that is a new solution of a location that existed in the 30s in a particular way, and the first competition was unsuccessful. There were, according to the jury of the working of which I had no idea, but it was not, there were no proper, no acceptable suggestions. Then again, another competition for the monument to one of the most liked mayors of the city of Sofia, Ivan Ivanov, who in the 30s not only redefined the way of thinking on urban terms about the city of Sofia, but also centralized the water supplies of the city. So I believe colleagues have told me who had been on the jury that the third round of competition was also unsuccessful because there is obviously probably somehow a problem with thinking about monuments right now in this city, maybe even in this country. There doesn't seem to be new agreement as to the metaphorical or visual plastic formal language of which to use and how to fit into the city. So another interesting thing is that yesterday the courtyard of the National Gallery Square, Kvadrat 500, opened an exhibition of an old master, so to say, Professor Krumdamyanov, who was in the 80s, late 70s actually, until the early 80s, who's a very, very, one of the top names being commissioned to construct these historical monuments. Some of them have, nearly all of them have remained in Sofia. I particularly like the one in Stara Zagora, but there are many, many other monuments. And the language that he is using now is completely different from what he was using in the past. I'm saying this because the visual, the plastic language that people like himself and Professor Valentin Starchev, the author of the demolished monument in front of the National Palace of Culture, was a mixture between many things. Ideologically, it was for a socialist state, but plastically it was eclectic, based on kind of modernist, constructivist paradigms. Now, again, the Bronze House as an object has this constructivist, clearly constructivist aesthetics, which is important to mention. And then the location. I've pulled up a photograph you might not have seen from what the location was in the past. This is I believe, from 1999, when again, after many years of debate and many artistic projects from Bulgarian artists that suggested what to do with this mausoleum and how to redefine it, maybe find a new use for it. It was not successful, so it was demolished. It took about a week, and the CNN covered the demolition process with a lot of fanfare, so to say, but finally it was taken away. And this spot is ever since has been like a blind spot in the center of town. Because of the Bronze House and the debate that was triggered last year and then went on over this year, and now we are nearing the completion of the run of the project, and finally this particular spot had been investigated, so to say, a little bit reinforced temporarily. And the decision of the Sofia Municipal Council is that the underground of the mausoleum will be used as a branch of the Sofia City Art Gallery after redesigning and redoing on one level, and then the top level will be the spot where the Bronze House is right now, will be used for temporary, contemporary, so to say, projects. The program is called Navan, or Outdoors, Exterior, Outdoors, let's say. And in the moment there is the competition is going on for projects for the next year. Now, this is important to say because within the whole context, the vision of Sofia and redefining Sofia, these are all testing grounds, these are all pilot projects. The whole area where the Brown House is now is supposed to be a subject of an architectural competition, just like the area around Sveta Nedelja Cathedral. And all of this means that we are in the middle of a process of negotiations. And the title of this meeting is Public Art, Art in Public Space, and the Process of Negotiations. So, how do you see this process of negotiations? What is public art, public space, first of all, in your view, and public art, how does it fit in? Vanessa, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction, and also a warm thank you to Jara Bubnova and the National Gallery for hosting this talk. Plamen Dejanoff asked Kunsthalle Wien end of last year if we would be willing to, in a way, like loosely join the project, because, I mean, as you all know, he's based in Vienna and the project takes place in Sofia. And he and also I thought it might be interesting to have at least, like, you know, some or a few or like 2 or 3 public events talking about exactly the kind of questions that you just like asked, and also to shift the focus from the very specific local perspective to a broader perspective, because these issues that there is this void in the city center, that art in a way tries to thematize a lot of questions, and that this kind of like posing questions via public artwork raises other questions, and sometimes even like a furious debate. That's something that we all know from art history, but nevertheless it's always the point of departure for something that changes the entire space and the locality, and also I think the discussion about the role of art. And one should not do that, but you always do that before the, you know, official talk. 5 minutes before we sat down, we already started our discussion. And I think for me there's 2 crucial questions. We always talk about art in public space, and then we mainly discuss the art, and we hardly ever discuss the public, because I don't know how the situation is here in Sofia, but talking about Vienna, and I grew up in Western Germany, I would just refer to that space formerly known as public space, because there is no such thing as the public, which means like an area accessible to everybody, where some kind of like exchange between different people can happen. What we have now is a more like semi-commercialized or gentrified so-called public space. That's the one thing. And then the second thing is art in public space in a way refers to a more traditional idea of mainly like sculpture, big-scale sculpture. Whereas what you just mentioned, public art is a newer form of dealing with a public that involves both like sculptures but also like performative projects, and these kind of artworks are more in favor of the second part of like art in public space, that is the public, and how the encounter between people who live somewhere, who use a certain area, interact with art, and what kind of possibilities and opportunities contemporary art can, in a way, offer.
Yeah, so good evening from me as well, and thanks to Jara for hosting it. I think I agree, it's incredibly important. And I heard that there have been heated debates about the Bronze House. And this is why I find it really interesting to participate in the debate. What art in the public space, public art / could do or not. So one should also think about what it cannot do. I think the situation has become more complicated and more complex. There's no agreement anymore. Because Luchezar, you mentioned the socialist era, there was an agreement what art should be. Yeah, implemented, but nevertheless it was implemented. And there is, I don't want to go through the genesis of art in the public space, but what's really interesting now is that there are different forms, historically one after the other, but you can find now all those forms together. So there is autonomous art, which means that it's more unique artworks chosen for a site and more in terms of a landmark, serving, well, also touristic needs, kind of, and there is, of course, site-specific art or context-specific. So, and not forget about city furniture, public furniture, which is very often very functional in terms of serving the needs, but when it comes to public encounters, it's really important to have, to also think of public stages, theaters, arenas, whatever, but also the sitting ensembles. And there's also a connection to other disciplines, to landscape architecture, and then of course, well, new genre, public art, community art, and here there's one, don't make it for a community, create a community. So all those things together, well, matter, and you can find all of them in the public space, which is not that public anymore. That's definitely true. And the idea what art is has become multifaceted in the idea what public means as well. And there are some, they say, well, there is no public space anymore. I do not really agree, because there are struggles going on. What this, and also that you mentioned, you said negotiations. So what kind of negotiations and who participates in these negotiations? That's another important issue to be discussed, and who has an interest in it, because well, when I was on the taxi, I had well, a curator from the museum next to me, and she said, well, there's not much, there are not many, there are not many contemporary artworks here in the public space. So, and there must be a need for it, or a desire at least. And so who has an interest, who wants? And I like the initiative, and the idea is fantastic. So it all started with the Bronze House here, and that's what Plamen's work is all about. So to place something, and this raises enormous debates, but then to go beyond and offer it as a place for upcoming artworks, contemporary artworks in the public space, or at least to stimulate debates about what this could mean on such a, well, such a spot, which is, let's say, highly contaminated, or at least layered.
Well, starting from the last comment, is definitely one of the arguments in support of starting such a program, and precisely with the Bronze House, was number one, it's a bronze structure which is not a permanent monument. So what will happen with it afterwards? It's, you know, the artist will have to deal with it. But, it's not you know, our problem. Another thing is how to redefine the spot, the memory. It's so loaded with negative connotations that in the future, I believe that the value of the project, the Bronze House, will be measured not only visually, plastically, but what did it do in terms of kickstarting the process of thinking about this particular location in a new way. And we will see what will happen with the next project, because it's probably not even sure that this location will survive as a spot for contemporary art, because probably nobody wants it, or we don't want to talk about contemporary art in public space all the time, and so on and so forth. There is also the question, I'll ask you about the landmark, the branding. Like, are there public art projects that you might identify in the cities that you have been living and working as kind of functioning as branding? And Barbara, you in particular, you're the director of the Kunsthalle in Graz, which itself as a building, it's like, it looks like a blue UFO. It's very strange. To me, it looks like this organ of the cow that is, you know, the milk comes out of it. I don't know how it is in English. But the branding, how do you deal with this very powerful architecture in Graz?
It's true. It's a landmark, and people know it wherever I'm traveling to. Even in Korea, people know about the building, even they don't know Graz. They never heard of Graz, but know exactly the building. So this is exactly what politicians dream of, because it attracts many tourists. And for me, it is a powerful tool. It attracts attention. And then it matters what do you do with the attention it attracts. And of course, also to think carefully about your neighbors, the cultural fabric in town, so other institutions, other initiatives, the relationship the Kunsthaus has to the other institutions. So, and well, most recently, there's a heavy political debate going on in Graz, because the right-wing movement, as in many other countries, has got quite strong, and there's a Forum Stadtpark, well, which was founded, well, I would say one of the early avant-garde institutions, and the political decision was they get no funding anymore. And then not only the Kunsthaus, but Opera House and theater all together, and all others, we joined forces, and it was really possible to change the situation. So that was interesting. So, and this is the weight of the bigger institution, what could really play with in terms of that you could stimulate debates or just add. So it's a powerful, and that's, so, but coming back to, because this is a building, and this is an institution. So what if there is, let's say, a sculpture, a landmark? And I'm not, well, I am critical when it comes to landmarks, but what landmarks definitely do, they create an emotional connectivity to the site. And the emotional connectivity, that's what the Kunsthaus building also does. But that's not enough. So what comes after? But it helps, it's like it opens the doors to, well, then people are more willing to listen or to look at things. And there are some good examples as well. I mean, a very famous one is Anish Kapoor's Cloudsgate in Chicago. So this is a landmark, but it also does something to the sites. So it's not only a sculpture which, well, anyway, which is, well, an answer to increasing consumerist needs. I would not put it like this, but it's, so that's why I think landmarks can be used as well. This unique, outstanding qualities. What difficulty comes in when people say, well, this is, well, I wish to have a very diverse landscape of artworks in the public space. So that's for me definitely, because then you can also accept this kind of works. Yeah. But I think Anish Kapoor is cleverly dealing with the mechanisms or the sensational. So he turns it into a subject, and that's why it's a good example for a unique.
The sculpture that Barbara is referring to, I believe, was recently again a subject of controversy because it was used by as in one of the advertisements, visual of the National Rifle Association of America, pro-gun lobby in the States, and Anish Kapoor sued the pro-gun lobby, and they had to take it away from their advertisement.
Well, I mean, what came to my mind immediately is. Landmark sculpture I really don't like. I used to live in Frankfurt, and when they introduced the euro to Germany and other countries, a local artist was commissioned to do an artwork celebrating the euro, and he came up with the idea of a gigantic euro sign, which was placed vis-a-vis of the main theatre, and it's still there, because it's in every TV feature. So whenever the news is about something abstract, about Euro crisis, etc., then you see this Ottmar Hörl Euro sign. And that's the problematic side of landmark architecture, when there is like a consensus about that it's like, you know, good art, or that you don't like it, or when it's just there, then it's still monumental, but it doesn't play an active role anymore. And I think the good thing, and that was also like that's the positive landmark, and I think that should be valid for art in public space or public art in general. It needs to be activated. It needs to, in a way, interact with an audience. You still need to find people who stand there and say like, oh my god, this is great, or like, God, is that art? Or like, you know, any kind of debate, because I think a debate is the main characteristic of a functioning public space. And therefore I think the Bronx House, with all the controversy that it created, is like an outstanding example for, in a way, like initiating that kind of debate, which is based on a dissent and not on a consensus, because I think lots of people have become aware of this like void in the city center, which is also very rare. I mean, it's Sofia, the capital, in front of the parliament. Usually there's far too many artworks and you cannot get rid of them. So, I mean, to decide what could fill this place, what could represent a certain idea of history, that's, you know, a challenge that cannot be resolved by one single artwork. And I think this ongoing thinking about like how do we, and I really emphatically use this collective we, how can we think about history, what kind of like image do we want to project into the future? That is, I think, one of the really like important roles that art can play. But what art cannot do is art cannot answer all these questions. It can just be this like, you know, annoying being that constantly asks something and questions something, but there's never like a precise answer. And that's maybe the political problem, that lots of politicians in a way expect an answer from a work of art.
May I add something to the Bronze House? Because I think it's also very important, because how, well, it is not so far away, let's say, from classical art in the public space. That's what I'm saying. In terms of, it's a hybrid between architecture and sculpture, modernism, modernist references, as you said, and taking up very classical notions of art, but it's also a landmark. And landmark not necessarily means that people love it; they can also hate it. Well, it is a trigger, and it has turned into a trigger to stimulate debates, heated debates. And now the question is, what comes after? So how can these processes, which stimulated discourses, can be used for the upcoming projects?
Also, I think what one should not underestimate, it's a sculpture that can be used. I mean, you can walk on this plateau, you are invited to like enter the house. I was there today and they had to erect signs that it's not allowed to climb on top of the sculpture, because I think lots of people feel tempted to do so. But in a way, you can appropriate it, you can use it. I mean, I don't know how many like pictures and selfies, etc., have been taken with the Bronze House. But in a way, it also uses the former mausoleum as like literally like a platform for people to like, you know, encounter each other in this like historical space. And I think this is something we should not underestimate. I mean, it sounds as something super normal, but usually these kind of places, they are really like protected from people. You're not allowed to go there. And again, like being German, there is this like year-long debate about the upcoming monument to celebrate the German unification. And there was also like a long-term competition with the result, and nobody's really happy with the result, but somehow people and politicians are in this situation where they cannot say no anymore. So they already prepare for like, you know, a future with a monument that in a way is already considered a bit too conservative, because it is like a very classic kind of sculpture which does not provide this kind of possibility for encounter and like literal appropriation.
Well, one thing is for sure, that this same location ever since the monument, the mausoleum was gone, has been the most attractive spot for constructing a monument, a permanent structure. And as far as I'm aware of the ongoing debate, is no city government so far has been willing to commit to a permanent monument on this cursed space. People literally use the term cursed spot because of the mausoleum and not only the negative connotations, but and so it is. We'll see. I don't know. For sure, this problem will go on for some time, but nobody knows how it will evolve. You were mentioning interesting things such as like what public art or art in public space cannot do. I mean, we cannot expect from it. That is one thing that I wanted to ask both of you. And there is another thing that it's pure terminology, but maybe it will make things a little bit more clear in terms of triggering a debate. Again, negotiating, who negotiates here in Sofia, in Bulgaria, everybody negotiates, also on Facebook, and it's good, I think. It's like, it makes much more lively public atmosphere, for good or bad. But how about differentiating between public art, which is like a monument, which is the product of a relative consensus in society, and also between the citizens and power and all the communities and location and blah blah blah. That's one thing. Then art in public space would be something that is temporary intervention, such as the Bronze House or similar things, that signify a process of debate, negotiation, which is ongoing. It doesn't, it's like a working consensus, a temporary consensus. And thirdly, there are all the other options of not even negotiating, like art of urban intervention, when you do something in an urban space or public space without asking a permission. Graffiti is the clearest case, but there are many other variations. So, two aspects. What it cannot do, and how about differentiating some?
It cannot serve all needs and expectations, and this is one of the biggest problems in my opinion, because well, it shall enhance life, create a community, be sensational as an object, enable all kinds of encounters. So I think there are too many expectations on art in the public space and on public art, and the way out is only if, well, I like this idea of temporality and lots of different things, all kinds of, so the not permitted interventions or whatever you want to call it. So that there is a variety, because the more there is, the more debates are going on, for sure. Because that's also then, there are several views on what it could be, should be, and also clashing in the best way, so that there is no agreement, so that then it ends up with the negotiations you mentioned in the beginning. So one also needs the frictions, you spoke of this, and that's quite important. And if it's only the one object and all attention is focused on the one object, that's not so good, because then all expectations go to the one object. And then one has to ask, well, what can it do? What does this object do?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and as said, art cannot solve issues. It can just like ask more questions than there already are. But I think it's indeed one crucial thing that, especially like politicians, also like very general term, but they tend to have like expectations that are too high. Yeah. That you place something in contaminated, cursed, whatever space, and then all the problems related to this space, whether it is ideological ones or social ones, are not solved but are thematized. And another, which is not really related to the question, another aspect that is quite interesting is, I mean, the public is already a very dissonant polyphony of voices. And what art can do is in a way to orchestrate these voices at least a bit, to silence the ones that are too loud, maybe the commissioners, and to give voice to the ones which are in the third line and at the beginning almost inaudible. So I think and that of course also needs some kind of like mediation, because one of the, of course, not problems, but one of the facts about an artwork in public space is that it's just there. And in order to activate, it needs a kind of debate. Sometimes it happens like, you know, by itself, but sometimes, of course, you can push it, or you can provide some programming. You can, what we do here, for instance, you know, that there is at least like, you know, some people talking about it. Maybe like some people in the audience think like, okay, why do they talk about these things and not me? Which means like, okay, next time it's your turn. So in a way, again, this like activation is absolutely important, because and this happens with like, you know, gigantic sculptures in public space. For the locals, they are invisible because they pass by every day, and after a while you don't notice them anymore. And with a good work, this should not happen. There should always be some passerby stopping and getting furious and asking lots of questions. Why this here now, etc.
Well, there is another aspect coming in. I'm not talking about Bulgaria because I don't know, but I can talk about Hungary because I know that there are commissions, newly commissioned artworks, and they, well, I don't want to say classic now, I want to say very old-fashioned monuments, very representational, mostly showing, well, Saint Stephen, for example, the national saint everywhere. Hundreds of monuments like this. So, and I'm wondering, that's my question I'm having, what's going on here with the representational monuments? And is there an interest, a national interest in having, you know, the national heroes, the national saints? Because that's quite strong in many post-socialist countries as a tendency. And I'm wondering if there has been, well, the idea to put something like this up, a national hero, there, or is it too nasty in terms of the past?
No, we're entering the area where everybody can also make a statement, but the context is, yes, of course. I wouldn't know about national saints. That is something that so far hasn't, at least to my knowledge, at least in Sofia. Kirill Methodist, there are a lot of monuments, but there have been there. This is kind of explained because culturally, historically, Bulgarian ethnicity has survived because of the language, the alphabet, within centuries across living under somebody else's domination, so to say, like mildly. But that is in the past. There are other saints like Saint Joan of Rila, who was a hermit, and that I haven't heard of anybody making a monument, at least not in Sofia. But the historical figures of tsars and kings and rulers, there is not only in Sofia, but in all the major cities, depending on the local history of the city, there is already a monument or monument in the working. And the newest example, but I'll make a further extend the context beyond Sofia. The newest example is not far from here. It's the monument to Samuel, a tragic figure in Bulgarian history from the 10th, 11th century, and after his rule. It's a really long story. And this was indeed a monument that was also debated from all points of view, and it's also kind of already sort of people like it and dislike it. It's more popular with non-experts than with experts, but it's there. And so nowadays there is a much more complex process. And this here, I wanted to bring up the very, very valid comparison to Skopje, which all of you have heard, the Skopje 2014 program, which filled the city with a lot of really crazy monuments. Within 1 square kilometer, it looks like a Disneyland, and it was the previous government, and now the new government, the new Republic of North Macedonia has taken. They're wondering what to do with all these things, but there is one major difference in terms of legislature. In Skopje, it's all public money, and it's all, and it's all different artists, and it's very stylistically, it's kind of not well taken care of. It was too fast. In the law in Bulgaria, I think, but in Sofia for sure, is that it's like this. If you want to suggest to the municipality a monument, you have to have like an initiative committee with signature, and they propose to the municipality. But they also have to propose not only whom to dedicate or what to dedicate the monument to, they also have to collect the money. So it's never public money, unless it's like a top national priority, and that happens quite rarely. And then they also have to suggest the location, but that doesn't, the preferred location doesn't mean the committee will get it, because then the city interferes and has to, there are all sorts of city departments like national, Department for Architecture and Urban Planning and so on and so forth. So, major difference. And here the process now, with national historical figures, it also goes on the level of each city and on the level of the Ministry of Culture, the national level. And there are committees of architects and artists and so on.
But this brings us to the rules and the frames.
Exactly.
So what are the conditions under which all those things can happen? Because I'm wondering, where does the money come from then? So private people, obviously, or groups, and they have, what kind of interest do they have? And is there any debate? So there is some debate, but generally speaking, the lack of public interest. And so what about the parameters under one should think about, has this taken place, that there are, are there groups, initiatives to stimulate a kind of legal framework here for contemporary art projects in the public space?
There is, yeah, of course, there is, I don't know, I don't see the colleague who is much more into this, but of course there is, first of all, they're constantly shifting. There is a lot of confusion, but there is kind of a movement for the better. However, the main point with our debate is that the law as it stands now, is if you have an initiative, you have to bring in the money. So it's private money, but that's not the main question. Is that public space, no matter how you define it, or whether you think there is no public, let's just call it urban space, is considered to be a public resource. It's not to be wasted just for anything, just for any monument. And you cannot, and public resource means that the city, within one generation, like what happened in Skopje, within several years, the city in the central has no more room for monuments. And we have to think about, let's say, future generations, and then we have to look back and see how the city was filled up over the decades with streets and boulevards and buildings and monuments. So that is the main thing here. I'm not sure that the debate has reached this far, like to think about the urban space as a public resource, precisely in connection to monuments. But I hope that projects like the Browns House and whatever comes next will sooner or later take us to this area. And how is it in, what you want to say?
No, I mean, we could even call this discussion here like a luxury problem, because I also lived in Cologne for a while, and they started projects about all the so-called unwanted works in public space that they have, because that was also on the list. Once something is there, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it. And in Cologne it was also like that. Many of these works in public space were actually like donated by bank companies, by other companies, so they placed like a sculpture in front of the building, which was not, their territory, but that was urban public space, and then of course you cannot tell them to just remove it, because it's a very delicate process of negotiation. But here I think it's quite the opposite, because the Bronx House, and this is what I really like about it, it actively stimulates the discourse about, space as a resource that should belong to more than just the owner. that should not just be part of the municipality, but should be like, you know, a place where the general, you know, population can meet and also think what happens. Because, I mean, the so-called public space is not only on a global level, it's shrinking everywhere. And most of the time unnoticed. You only notice it when it's too late. And then what's like lots of public projects are about this like reclaiming space. That's far more difficult and to stimulate it. And also, I mean, I like the idea that the initiative to have the Bronx House at this very prominent space, in a way one could also say, like, you know, it prevented this space from being occupied with something else, because like once you have something which is of course like a very advanced contemporary sculpture, you set a certain level of discourse, and it's really difficult to fall back into something very, very traditional. That would cause another political controversy. Barbara disagrees.
But it's possible, because in Graz, because you asked me how is it where we are, there is a right-wing government, and it's so difficult to put whatever up in the public space. So and it was already there. There was a high level of art in the public space, and a lot of great debates. I just say Hans Hake, and this is the reason. So the city government learned, the municipality learned from this, that it's better not to allow artworks to be set up to avoid the public discourse. So there is sometimes the way back.
Wasn't it Graz the site of a debate many years ago when somebody wanted to build up a monument to Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's a native of Graz? It's crazy. Okay, so I think we can open for questions, and if somebody feels like asking a question, now's the time. But while we're waiting for questions, I will quote rule number 6 from the 12 rules of new public art, and it says like this: demand more than fireworks. Believe in the quiet, unexpected encounter as much as the magic of the mass spectacle. Which is, it's kind of a rule that makes you feel like modest. Like you don't need to have very big interventions. It could be something that could trigger a debate in a neighborhood. And one thing that in Sofia I think is a problem, is that the center is quite different from the outskirts of the city. Unlike Vienna, let's say, where even the last subway metro stop is equally well taken care of surroundings as in the center, more or less. So, questions, please.
No, also like I hope Plamen it's okay if I talk about that. We from when we thought to in a way accompany the project a bit, there was the idea to, you know, in the end have like a publication documenting the book. And then we started to discuss it, and then we had the idea, like, why not have a website? Because the website, it's not just because it's something more like contemporary, because we really started to talk again about like which kind of audience, which kind of public does a book address, and how accessible is a website. And the good thing about a website is also like it's never the final version. You can always update something, you can add other voices to the discussion, you can review the project like with a distance of like 10 years. So what will be the next project is like a very good website, which also gives space to the very controversial discussion, which is, I think, now a very important part of the book, and therefore also that will happen afterwards, could be part of it. So it's also about like that these kind of things constantly have to be activated, and the discussion should continue, and it's not just like, you know, check, done, next project.
There's questions? I'll keep on asking. Don't. this question.
It's too not long enough.
It's not long.
No.
Thank you. I have a question which appears during the discussion, particularly about this project, the Bronze House, and we were speaking about the function of this art in the public space, also the public art. All the time we spoke about the debate and how actually initialize some kind of a movement of talking and thinking of things. But my experience with this particular project was that it's not really, doesn't really attract the people to use the space that much. Maybe yes, speaking was sometimes too much about the project, but somehow it's left distant for physically for the people. And when we speak about public space, do we speak only about public space of thoughts or public space which we use practically? Practical mean like not for some simple things, but the space we use for living and dream and speak and touch, and this is our communication.
To whom are you addressing the question? Or
Yeah, I would be happy to hear something more about from the author, how he feels after the project is ended, about what was really the result of this act.
Plamen,
Thank you.
are you ready to answer?
But maybe also like one comment from my side. I think we should not. We talked a lot about stimulating discourse, etc. But that, of course, like is not doesn't have necessarily to happen like on the spot. This is also just like a metaphor. This is just like the trigger for something, and it can happen everywhere. It can happen in a super like agitated like Facebook. I would not even call that debate and controversy. And so this is also just like the placeholder for something else. And that's why I like that it's like a house, an abstract house that is not even a house because it does not have a roof. It is in a way like something that resembles some historical building, but it's not like 100% like that. So it's also like more like, you know, posing questions than giving answers. But maybe Plamen has some comment. Yeah.
Not yet. You can take it now.
I don't know. Well, when I started the project, I was even not thinking about realizing it in Sofia. I wanted to go out or to go on the periphery. I was thinking of the region of around Trnovo, Vanessa. As an artist, I was having other questions. So there was other points, other values that I was interested to bring, to build something, to put it outside of the art world, to create their own city based on some artworks, to constructions, plenty of questions. Well, I was, to be honest, against when 5 years ago, a group of collectors started this initiative to realize the project in Sofia. Maybe I don't know why, but it was the opposite of what the idea was I was having with this project. it's not easy. It's not like, wow, it was a project that starts in my studio, based on discussions with curator. It was based on invitation and concept of exhibitions I was inviting through the years. A project that was realized slowly, step by step. I was not having precise idea for the first 3 years or 4 years when I started working at this project, how this work, this sculpture, it was even not planned to be a sculpture. It was just a process. And of course now we have it kind of result, but this is just whatever. Even I don't know. It's a skin. It's an element of a process. It's an element of thousands of questions, of thousands of tries or answers that I was giving in the last year, in the last 20 years with my works. And once more, when I heard that it's going to be realized in Sofia, I was for many years not happy, and I was even fighting against. Yeah, at the beginning. But then I realized, why not? I thought to me, why not? Let's try. Let's see. I was proud that it was somehow, from my point of view, the first sculpture, maybe in the history of our country, I mean in Bulgaria, that starts was starting in a studio, was start with exhibitions everywhere in the world, start in Paris, played in Tokyo, went to to Berlin, Shanghai, and at the end was realized in Bulgaria, in Sofia. I was proud because probably it was the first sculpture that was not commissioned by king, by the party, or by the company, and my idea was basic. If I can reduce everything, was that something that can be used, and I saw it as a definition of a space that can be used for art projects. So this was one of the ideas. Why for some people it's not working? Why? I don't know. It's so difficult to answer this. Yeah, no, it's. I thought also that from my point of view, maybe one of the reasons why I agreed to build it in Sofia was that there was not other projects, not other sculptures or artworks like this that they create a space that can be used as a place for art. I used to do this since the beginning of my career. It's a kind of display or kind of basement or kind of platform for even for thinking about art, collecting art, questioning what is art. Barbara was one of the creators who support these ideas, even from the beginning, these kind of platforms. In this case, it's a kind of three-dimensional platform. Why it's not working for many people, and why so criticized from the beginning, I don't know. I have no idea. But I thought, and I saw it in other countries. I saw it in Hamburg, in the Kunstverein. I saw it in Shanghai, and it was different situation. It was more positive or more comfortable for me. I was not really feeling well the whole process and the whole time here, spending time in Sofia with this sculpture. And I hope that, and from my point of view, there was not time since the sculpture was opened in October or November. There was no light before. Somehow, it's from my point of view,
things sometimes needs time, especially from my point of view as an artist. I always spent many years to work on one project, so I am always having problems with this 2 months that you have to give all energy and you have to all expectations put in 2 months and everyone to make happy and the politicians shouldn't like it and the population should people in Sofia should like it. Yeah, I don't know, the curator and the colleagues and the tourists and who everyone. So yeah, sorry, maybe it's not precise.
No, I know I think it's totally precise, and it's to me it's totally clear why you feel so uncomfortable, because I look at your work as being process-driven, and it starts much earlier, and it doesn't end. So it's materialized on this spot, this moment. If you look at this as being a process which started years ago, and it will be ongoing. So this is not the result, this is not the final thing. And this is so difficult to grasp, because it looks like a classic sculpture, or architecture, or hybrid, whatever. And it does not speak in itself of this process, but it stimulates, again, another process. So that's why I think the impact it has, it's enormous. The impact is enormous and has been enormous. And it's not just what happens on site, but also the way it connects various sites. What you said before, that it's, I don't know how many parts, 300 or something? So, or more, yeah. So, and shown everywhere, and it also cross-connects institutions, all kinds of initiatives, the global market, because as you said, the collectors, but local traditions. So that's what I think the work addresses. And this is readable.
And also one thing, we understand that the artist wishes that everybody likes or agrees with his or her artwork, but I think a really good, very contemporary artwork is a work that in a way asks for discussion, and consensus is the death of a good artwork. If everybody likes it, then it's boring. So, I mean, it's hard to face, but this for me is also a big compliment that it works. That it really started these discussions, and then now there's really even further discussions what could be done with the entire space, how it could be used, how it could be changed. I think this is an enormous effort that was just triggered by this project. So
not only discussions, because I agree with you that we are talking about discussions and debates and stimulations of debates. It also does, I would say it also causes irritations, but not only here in Sofia, but elsewhere, because I remember when this work was shown in other places, what is it? Why these strange ornaments? What is it? Is it decoration? Is it, it looks so strange, it doesn't really fit into expectations as well. So when it was shown in Western institutions, for example, there was also there were critical remarks addressing why does it look like this? And many other projects of Plamen connect let's say cultural heritage or elements which can be seen in connection to the cultural heritage with processes of globalization, and also processes of globalization in the market, and this relation of a tradition which is connected to a special site, to a particular site, and this nomadic, let's say, global art machine. This is also a tension which it creates. So it has many more layers than what's going on here, I would say.
Well, hopefully, and this is, I take it as a compliment to where we live also. Robert?
this construction, there was a large debate here in Bulgaria. So I asked some of your colleagues from West Europe, what is their opinion about this construction. I get different answers. So I would like to ask you personally also, because I'm making my personal research around this place, also the constructions what was built here. So if you was the curators of this project, would you be proud with the results? So what's your opinion? This is just a question, probably a little bit stressful, but I'm curious to hear your answer. I don't want to be on because it was a border. I am not on this side of the border or on another side of the border. I'm just curious to hear your personal opinion. So thank you.
I would be proud, but would have chosen a different procedure to implement and communicate about the project. But after, one's always wiser than before. So that's unfair to say it, because looking back, it's always like this. You say, I should have done it differently. So this is most probably what I had done, but also most probably I would have also underestimated the difficulties coming alongside.
Yeah, if I was the curator, I'd also be very proud that it finally happened, and I would be very relieved that it's there, taking into account all the obstacles that appeared, and also, of course, I agree with Barbara, I would also be wiser and plan more strategically next time. But on the other hand, if we look at art in public space projects, they always have to face unexpected obstacles, and they most of the time they turn out slightly different than originally expected. I hardly know any project that is exactly the same as it was conceived by the author at the very beginning.
I can think of at least one author that tends to get this result, and that's it's. I'm not going to mention his and her name, but he at least is a Bulgarian born. His name is Christo. He usually gets well. I mean, that's fine. If there are other questions, just tell me. I just okay.
I can say here. It's okay. I have a good voice.
Okay.
Okay. I'm a sculptor, and first I want to.
Your name, please, for the.
Rafael Boyadjiev. First I want to congratulate the author to come here in Bulgaria to make this original art. For my opinion, it's too small for the space, but this is other thing. It provocates questions because it's the only one contemporary art sculpture project in the country itself. And you said that it's going to follow some new projects. And my question is, what is the future of this place, of this area? And if the ladies were the curators of this new project, what kind of art should be built in this place? I'm talking about the Müller.
I spoke about it in the entry
because
comments.
you said about
the
competition that it's going to be held on, and I'm assuming there's going to be some discussions about after the work of Dejanoff, what kind of art should go after.
We don't know yet. There is the decision of the municipality. It's two-folded, and it was announced when in the spring and then in the fall. But the spring, first of all, the mausoleum, the underground, is a space which in the future will undergo architectural engineering renovation, will be part of the Sofia City Art Gallery. The surface area where now the bronze house is, that was announced as a spot for contemporary art projects, and that was announced in the fall, and then there were submitted projects, I believe 17 or so, and it's undergoing. We don't know when the full result will be in. and when it will be announced?
It's interesting because I never heard about it. I'm participating in a lot of projects of Luchezar around the world, and I never heard about it. Maybe it wasn't announced very well. But anyway, I have a question to the creators. What they think this new art in the space should be? What type?
It's up to them to answer.
Well, I mean, as curator, it's not only about aesthetic and ideological decisions. I mean, first I would ask, like, what's my budget? Because that limits your visions. But I think I would use this place as a kind of like test scenario. And really, in the sense of this manifesto, we only have like a few paragraphs. I would really like use it to try to find out what the public is, and that could imply performance programs, that could imply real, precise, colorful sculptures, that could imply community-based projects. So I would rather go for like a variety of very different options, and then maybe like even like evaluate like what worked best and what kind of questions like turned out to be the most crucial ones.
Yeah, variety of different options, I fully agree. Definitely a jury which changes annually or every 2 years, which involves local people and experts from outside Bulgaria. So can be the majority Bulgarians, but it's always good to have a mix of people. So I think the framework is the most important and should be really taken seriously in terms of investing more time in thinking of the conditions, framework, than the actual implementation. And then I'm absolutely for variety. So to really go through all kinds of ideas, what could be there for years, decades.
Will you take the mic?
I would say the art,
Your name, please.
my name is Tobo, I'm an architect. The art is the last and the least problem of that place. That place has a lot of urban problems. It doesn't have any form. That place was subject of a lot of competition since almost 75 years. It had been subject to the competition which happened at 2014 and which ended with great success for that place, and the municipal government doesn't have any idea for this moment what will happen with the competition, which we had a winner, and if it would organize another competition to that place. This is just an idea for a gallery in the basement rooms of the former mausoleum, but it is just an idea. It had not been approved from the municipal council, and nobody still knows what would happen at that place. So, the bronze house didn't prevent the place from negative happenings there. Even now, there is a Kindermarkt which is organized at that place. It doesn't look beautiful at all.
Christmas market.
Christmas market.
In Vienna, there is a square, the Karlsplatz. It has been an endless, I would say the endless non-solutions, they have been key to the Karlsplatz. And maybe this is already something which is worth to be discussed, that there are some places in the world where there is no agreement and the frictions remain visible over decades and decades. So it's not beautiful, it's not pleasant, but it speaks about a certain history, well, and heavy ruptures which have occurred over a certain period of time. And I don't think it's necessarily bad.
Yes, but I mean, speaking about the Alexander Battenberg Platz, I've been there with Plamen this morning, and the Christkindlmarkt, the German one, creeping all over the square. I mean, it really destroys the idea that this is the central square in the city, like Sofia. It's just like an exchangeable thing, and that's what I said at the very beginning. This like slow but persistent commodification of space is something that we should be very, very aware of, and we should point to the fact that some spaces should not be occupied by these kind of activities.
That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about, well, the construction of the entire, or the ensemble, let's put it more from a spatial, urban point of view, and not about the uses. And because there I agree, but it seems that the Christmas markets are the most successful products, the best sellers from Germany and Austria, and you can find them all over the world, and it has turned into a disease.
Okay, so any more questions? We're just about to run out of time. From you?
Okay, I can ask.
Just mention your name, please.
Vasilin Kirov is my name. I'm a citizen. And I want to ask two questions. One is for Mr. Dejanoff. Does he plans to release a book for the whole process? Because I think it will be very interesting to. He said something in last month. I heard some things on the TV, and I think it will be very, very interesting. Not only for me, but for all of the citizens, the whole of the process. And if there will be an evaluation of this project as a whole, here it is not someone from Sofia municipality who probably will do that, but if someone can give me an answer.
First of all, it's the question.
Yes, I'm thinking, as usual, since years of doing a book about the project, and I'm very happy about one of the last discussions with Vanessa, when she also supported and came back with the idea that we should produce together with the Vienna website about the project instead of a classical book. I was thinking this since also thinking about the project, this web page since years. It was not I was not able to realize it for many reasons. I wanted to say before something, but but curators. Yeah, when we talk about the space now, about competition, what's going to happen after. I have to say, I was probably, even it was very hard, very lucky situation maybe, because I was not having, but was not heavy, not lucky situation. It was a heavy situation for me, realizing a project without institution, because it's very comfortable to have a good institution and a good curator next to you. It's the best. You can exchange, you can discuss, you can trust, you can get some inputs and ideas, and together it's amazing. It's the best way. I was here without institution, without curator, and the two institutions. The only one who supported me was the Austrian embassy. and 1 year later the municipality. But that's why at the end depends on people, the people you're working with, and their position and views. And what makes me a little bit afraid that after the bronze house, everything goes back to the municipality. Again, the next structure or next project is going to be realized, and the project is going to be ordered by someone again. And I was proud that I was, as I mentioned before, was not ordered by the king, or by the communist, or by the socialist, or not by the company. And coming back now, it's from my point of view a little bit problematic. But now we have now after the project, 3 months ago, the municipality decided, let's do an art project here. Let's do a next art project, whatever, which is very good. But now it depends on the people, and also I'm afraid that, and I mean, my position is that artists should not wait for the municipality to realize the project, but who knows?
I have to say that when the project was announced a year ago and throughout the process, there was constantly a mention and saying that things will happen around it, spontaneously. And I was asking, even in public, there were quite a lot of public debates last year especially. And people were, at least I was worried, aren't you going to prepare like a program of events, what happens on Saturday, on Monday, people, from kindergarten come to play, and then some opera singers can do, and it never happened. But now I realized that it shouldn't have happened. If the location and if the structure was triggering such response, okay, but if you planned it, then it would have been like a commemorative complex monument, something completely different. And so, as far as the evaluation goes, for sure, I'm not aware if there is any publicly visible plan announced apart from the artist, what he wants to do. But it's definitely worth to keep in mind that to at least in the media responses that have been recorded somehow to have an archive of this, which in this country we are not very good at archiving, at least not as a general rule for institutions, basically. But another comment post factum is that it's really, I cross my fingers, one of the strongest opposition a year and a half ago came from architects and sculptors, because they were really concerned about the structural aspects, the engineering of it, the support, the surface, the ground reinforcements, the very structure itself, and very, very serious concerns. People who work with bronze on a daily basis, let's say. And one of the positive aspects is like how well done this structure is, how well fitting together all the components are. And I'm not going to go because any further on this ground, because there is still more time to, the project is running for another couple of weeks or so. Last questions?
But this was also important. So handcraft was something that I was always interested in, and I was ashamed for many years.
He's a perfectionist.
I'm so happy now to hear from some people that I really love that they're also interested in the same. So it was one small part, but it was important.
Yes.
That's why maybe the production went finally to my studio and to Germany. Not.
People were expecting it to trip over because of the wind or because of the, and at least No, I mean, you never know. I mean, even the already mentioned.
I know it.
But look, even the already mentioned Bulgarian-born big star artist, he also. I mean, there is the unpredictability of, let's say, investment in the umbrellas.
No constructor, there was no architect, no constructor, no architect in Austria. It was thinking that this is going to be possible 12 years ago. I remember first discussion, even in Paris for the Palais de Tokyo first presentation, and later in Mumok for one of the next exhibitions. At this point, I was just saying, dear, and everyone say, impossible, impossible. Then I contact people from the science, and I asked them to help me because I was like I didn't want to agree or to accept that something is impossible. So I committed Wissenschaftler, scientists, to help me to create a construction without a construction inside, not to be a facade of a concrete construction, just to put the construction of the sculpture to be inside in the bronze. And it took 2 years until we create even the material for the sculpture. Well, I was not talking too much about this because it's conservative and it's boring, but it was somehow interesting part for me, and I know it already since 10 years ago. I know it's going to be possible, and even here in the TV, and even in the more serious in the national TV, national radio, I heard discussion with professors from the Academy of Science that this is absolutely stupid vision and will never happen and will never stay. So it's strange that, even the material was especially great, the alloyings for the project, the bronze alloy.
Last comments, Barbara and Vanessa, if you like it.
There was the question of the evaluation. I think what we are doing here is already like evaluating it a bit, and also I think evaluation in art is always very tricky because as like an institution, for instance, and I see Yara nodding, you're constantly evaluated by numbers of visitors and the number of like positive reviews you get, and in a way this is not, I think, because we don't talk about commodities, this is something that only illustrates, I think, 1/3 of the project.
Evaluation is only good if it's an ongoing evaluation, and it's not done from one, few, but several fews, and it also should involve corrections, changes, mistakes, should allow mistakes, and I agree that we are doing it now, pondering what was it, what is it, how can one really think further. So this is why, and that was a good discussion now, again. So it seems to be there are many things to say about. And I also like that you brought up the crafts aspect, because I think this is also a very key aspect of the work.
Not talking about this.
The construction and the craft.
Not only,
yeah. And thinking of it, that it all comes from the material. The construction comes from working and understanding material, which is sculptures. This is what sculptures do. And this, because of your good Bulgarian education at the academy.
It's true. Wait. There is a comment that Netko Solokov wants to make.
Then closing remarks.
Sorry, I have pain in my legs, so I prefer to sit down if possible. At the end of the day, I think it was a really, really successful project, and you should be really happy with that, including all of these so-called negative responses. They're really part of the work, and they make it richer and richer. Just imagine if everybody likes that. It could be really suspicious if everybody likes this. Several people asked me about my opinion about that, like internet sites, and several times I said that this was extremely important for the Sofia citizens, because for the very first time for many decades they could touch a bronze sculpture which is not kitsch. And this is extremely important, and I really love the way all of these details, they were matching together. And you also have this really bad eye, so you can see all of these parallel lines. Everything was really perfect. And this imperfection of the concrete base works really well for this perfect sculpture over there. And I think that this was really important with all the backups of certain institutions and so, which unfortunately they can't realize that whenever they oppose this, actually we, the artists, always win. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm actually would like
closing remarks.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes. Don't worry, it will be closing remark. First of all, thank you very much, everybody who is here, and Barbara and Vanessa, of course, and Plamen, who came for this final discussion. Thank you, Luchezar. It was nice to connect the artistic with the urban and the social. What was important for me in all those things, I'm really sorry that Plamen was this testing model for discussion and negotiation of the public. One of the most important things that, let's say, I have some experience with that, we usually use this very polite form, negotiation of the public. On a daily reality, it's somebody, one person, who has to pop up all those questions that the society can't ask without this person in front. In Plamen's case, it was, what it means to negotiate. Many years ago, we did a project about public space, and we had this very particular illusion from our local parts that we need a very well organized, absolutely clean and arranged city, that the urban system has to belong to everybody, means nobody, and there are supposed to be some very smart people who make all decisions, and the decisions are usually perfect because they are paid by public money. At the time, our, so say, opponents, or for some part proponents, they were saying, guys, you will see that it will be awful because you will have a city which has no difference with any other. We couldn't imagine that. Slowly, it happens, you have this shopping street, you have this street of restaurants, you have the administration buildings, which are usually looking much better than living conditions of the people and so on. But for me it was interesting, even it never happened, of course, to the end, that at least some of the agents of the public took their responsibility for what they were doing. The municipality, which was very enthusiastic without knowing what they plan and what they sign for, and then they became very frustrated, but things are not happening in the system of planning and responsibilities. The public opinion, Plamen was a victim of this public opinion. Specifically, so many sculptors insisted that the construction can't stand straight. I remember all that, and for me this was funny. I know Plamen for a pretty long time, and I know that at least in his hands it's possible to happen. He's very precise, he checks things and so on. I love the connection with the history and culture, with the locality and cultural heritage. I think it's one of the most interesting art works and art processes, I even don't want to say artifacts, that address on contemporary level cultural heritage. Not being enslaved by it, not being destructive towards it, not trying to museify, something is missing, or mummify the cultural heritage, but really to research, to study, and to try to look at it and to present it in a different way. So for me there were many particular elements. I have no idea what will happen with the new projects, but the new projects will happen because this project had happened through all the turmoils and problems. Renegotiation in the public means only that. It doesn't mean that it will be common, general, absolutely super positive opinion, attitude, and solution. It means that every time it's supposed to be renegotiated. Maybe after 1 or 2 or 3, we will be a little bit more polite and attentive. From my point of view, I trust the artist. This is, so to say, the school. Thank you very much again, and good luck to all future projects for the place and for many other places.